The ship was dead. That was the first thing Chief Medical Officer Tilla noticed when the tractor being dragged the wreckage into the cargo bay of the Tender Mercy. The human fighter was not just damaged. It was destroyed. The cockpit was torn open like something had bitten through it. The metal was black and twisted, and there were frozen crystals of blood floating in the zero-gravity pockets near the hull breach. No oxygen, no power, no life support. The rescue team had estimated that whoever was inside had been exposed to hard vacuum for nearly 40 seconds before they got the emergency seal around the cockpit. 40 seconds in the void of space. No species in the Galactic Union could survive that. Not the Veloxi, not the Drenari, not even the Korath, who were built like walking tanks. But the human was a Livathilla, stood in the medical bay and watched them carry him in on a hover stretcher. His name, according to his flight suit tags, was Lieutenant Marcus Cole. He was tall for a human, broad in the shoulders. His face was a mess of dried blood from a wound across his forehead, and his left eye was swollen shut. 3 ribs broken. 1 lung had been punctured, but somehow the tissue had already started to close on its own. His body temperature was dangerously high. His oxygen levels were dangerously low. His heart was beating too fast, and his brain activity was spiking in patterns that Thilla had never seen in any species. He should have been unconscious. He should have been in a coma. He should have been dead, but as Thilla leaned over him to attach the neural monitoring leads, his one good eye snapped open, and he looked directly at her. Thilla was Veluxi. She stood 7 feet tall, with a slender, segmented body covered in plates of deep blue chitin. Her eyes were large and dark and multifaceted, and she could feel emotions the way other species could feel heat. Right now, she was bracing herself to feel what she always felt from patients pulled out of wreckage: terror, agony, the desperate animal panic of a mind that knows it almost died. But what she felt from Marcus Cole was something she had no name for. It was warm. It was calm. It was almost playful. His cracked lips moved, and he spoke in a voice that was rough and dry and barely louder than a whisper. Well, that is the last time I let my ships. I picked the playlist during a dogfight. Thilla stared at him. Her antenna twitched. She ran the words through her translator implant twice to make sure she had not misunderstood. Beside her, the Drenari nurse Vosk made a sound that was the equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. Vosk was squat and wide, with gray-green amphibian skin and large flat eyes that blinked sideways. The Drenari were a species of pure logic. They cataloged everything. They measured everything. And right now, Vosk was measuring the human and finding numbers that did not make sense. His cognitive function should be severely impaired, Vosk said quietly. Cranial trauma alone would account for significant neural degradation. This statement he just made has no logical structure, no survival relevance, no informational content. He is delirious. Thilla agreed, and she reached for the sedation injector, but before she could press it to his neck, Marcus spoke again. His one good eye drifted to the ceiling of the medbay, and he smiled. It was a terrible smile, bloody and swollen and missing a tooth. On the left side, if the food here is anything like the last hospital I was in, he said, just let the vacuum take me. Then his eye closed, and his body went limp, and the monitors showed he had lost consciousness on his own. Thilla sedated him anyway, just to be safe. She stood there for a long moment after. The med bay was quiet, except for the hum of machines and the soft beeping of the monitors tracking the human's impossible vitals. Vosk was already typing notes into the medical log. Cranial trauma. Possible cognitive deterioration. Recommend full psychological evaluation upon regaining consciousness. Thilla should have agreed and moved on. She had seen hundreds of patients pulled from wreckage. She had treated species from every corner of the Union. She knew what delirium looked like. She knew what dying minds did when they fired. Random signals into a mouth that no longer had a functioning brain behind it. But this did not feel like that. She reached out with her empathic senses one more time and touched the edges of the sleeping human's emotional field. It was still there. That strange warm signature. It was not the static of a broken mind. It was not the fog of confusion or the sharp spikes of hallucination. It was structured. It was intentional. It was like nothing she had ever catalogued in 200 years of medical practice. "What are you?" she whispered to the unconscious human. He did not answer. His chest rose and fell. The monitors beeped. The lung was still healing itself. Tilla turned to her console and opened a new file. She typed the standard header. Species human. Designation Lieutenant Marcus Cole. Condition critical but stable. Then she added a personal note at the bottom. Something she almost never did. Patient displays anomalous emotional patterns inconsistent with diagnosed cognitive impairment. Recommend deeper analysis. Something is not right. His brain is not malfunctioning. I do not know what it is doing, but it is doing it on purpose. She saved the file and looked back at the human on the bed. He was still smiling in his sleep. That bloody, broken, impossible smile. Outside the medbay windows, the stars turned slowly, and the debris field of his destroyed fighter glittered like a field of broken glass. Somewhere out there, the Korath raiders who had done this to him were regrouping. Somewhere out there, the war was still happening, and in a quiet medical bay on a ship that had no weapons worth mentioning, a human was sleeping and smiling, and no one on board had any idea what that meant, but they would find out. They would all find out. Marcus Cole woke up 36 hours later, and the first thing he did was scare every single person in the medical bay. Not because he screamed. Not because he thrashed or panicked or ripped the monitoring leads off his body, the way trauma patients sometimes did. He scared them because he sat up, slowly looked around the room full of alien medical staff, and said with absolute calm, "So, who do I talk to about the parking situation? Because whoever towed my ship in did a terrible job." Vosk dropped a surgical instrument. A young Veluxi nurse made a clicking sound that meant distress. Thilla, who had been reviewing charts on the far side of the room, turned around so fast her antenna almost hit the ceiling. "He's awake," she said. "He's speaking," Vosk added, and there was something in his flat, logical voice that sounded almost like fear. Marcus looked down at himself. His chest was wrapped in a healing membrane that pulsed with soft blue light. His left eye was still swollen, but less than before. He could feel the deep ache of broken ribs every time he breathed, but he had felt worse. There was the time on Kepler Station when a loading crane had fallen on him. There was the bar fight on Titan where 3 guys had jumped him, and he had walked home with a fractured jaw eating soup through a straw for 2 weeks and laughing about it the entire time. Humans were not easy to kill. Marcus considered this one of the species' better features. Thilla approached him carefully, the way one might approach a wounded animal that could bite. She held a scanning device in one hand, and her large dark eyes studied him with an intensity that Marcus found both flattering and a little unsettling. "Lieutenant Cole," she said slowly, "do you know where you are?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "Medical ship. Galactic Union. You guys pulled me out of my cockpit after the Korath turned it into modern art." He watched her antenna move in a pattern he did not recognize. She was feeling his emotions again. He had heard about the Veluxi, empaths. They could read emotional fields like other people read books. He wondered what his felt like right now. "Probably something confusing to you. You know what day it is?" she asked. Marcus thought about it. "Depends. What calendar are we using? If it is the Union Standard, then I have no idea because I never learned that system. If it is Earth Standard, then it is either a Wednesday or a Thursday. Either way, it is not my favorite day." Thilla looked at Vosk. Vosk looked at Thilla. There was a silence that Marcus found deeply entertaining. "He's oriented to place and person," Vosk said carefully. "His reasoning appears intact. Memory of the incident is present and detailed." "And why is he still?" Phila did not finish the sentence. "To what?" Marcus asked. A Drenari psychiatrist named Dar-Ren was brought in an hour later. He was older than Vosk, with darker gray skin and eyes that had seen too many broken minds. He sat across from Marcus in a small examination room and folded his wide hands on the table and studied the human. "The way a scientist studies a new and possibly dangerous organism, Lieutenant Cole," he said. "I would like to ask you some questions," Marcus said. "But I should warn you," the last guy who gave me a psych-eval said. I was the most well-adjusted person he had ever met, and then he retired the next week. "I like to think those two things are not connected." Dar-Ren blinked sideways. He made a note. "I am going to describe your injuries to you," he said. "I want you to respond honestly to how they make you feel. You suffered 3 broken ribs, a fractured orbital bone, a punctured lung, 40 seconds of vacuum exposure, 2nd-degree burns on your left arm and shoulder. You lost approximately 1.2 liters of blood." Marcus nodded. He waited. Dar-Ren waited too. "Is there a question in there?" Marcus asked. "How does hearing that make you feel?" Marcus leaned back in his chair and winced slightly, because leaning back with 3 broken ribs was not his best decision of the day, honestly. "Doc, only 3 ribs. That is a Tuesday, where I come from." Dar-Ren stared at him for a long time. Then he wrote something in his notes. Then he wrote more. Then he kept writing for an uncomfortable amount of time. "Lieutenant Cole," he said finally, "I need to understand something. You nearly died. Your body was broken in multiple places. You were exposed to the vacuum of space. You should, by all medical and psychological models, be experiencing severe trauma response, fear, anxiety, nightmares, emotional collapse. Instead, you are making statements that have no factual basis and no survival purpose." Marcus looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment something shifted behind his eyes. Something deeper and older and harder than any joke. "Yeah," he said. "I know. Then why?" "Because if I stop laughing, Doc, I might have to think about how close I actually came. And I already know how close I came. I was there. I felt my lungs try to pull in air that was not there. I felt my blood start to boil under my skin. I saw the stars get bright and then start to go dark. I know exactly what almost happened to me. I just choose not to give it the satisfaction of seeing me cry about it." The room was very quiet. Dar-Ren wrote his report that evening. It was 3 pages long and extremely detailed, and the conclusion at the bottom read: "The human appears to be suffering from a persistent dissociative coping mechanism likely rooted in species-wide cognitive dysfunction. The patient uses fabricated statements and irrational claims as a defense against psychological collapse. While his baseline cognition appears intact, his emotional processing is severely compromised. Recommend extended observation and possible long-term psychological intervention." Marcus heard every word of it through the thin walls of the med bay. The walls on the Tender Mercy were not built for privacy. They were built for a species that communicated, partially through vibration, and did not understand the concept of eavesdropping. He lay on his back on the medical bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the Drenari psychiatrist explain to the Veluxi empath that the human was fundamentally broken inside, and Marcus laughed. He laughed so hard that something popped in his chest, and a sharp hot pain shot through his left side, and he knew instantly that he had cracked the rib again, the one that had just started to heal. The monitors started beeping, and Vosk rushed in and found the human curled on his side, holding his ribs and shaking and making a sound that the Drenari had no word for. Vosk called for Thilla. He administered pain relief. He resealed the rib and updated the medical log. Patient re-injured healing fracture during episode of involuntary vocalization. Cause unknown. Consistent with ongoing cognitive deterioration, Marcus wiped tears from his eyes and caught his breath and looked up at Vosk, who was standing over him with an expression of deep professional concern. "Hey, Vosk," Marcus said. "Yes." "Lieutenant and Demon going to be fine," Vosk nodded slowly. He did not believe that. Not even a little bit, but the human was smiling again. That same bloody, impossible smile from the first night. And somewhere deep in the back of his logical Drenari mind, Vosk felt something he had never felt before. He felt like he was missing something important. The mess hall on the Tender Mercy was a wide, low-ceilinged room with soft lighting designed to calm patients and crew alike. The food dispensers lined the far wall, and the tables were arranged in clusters based on species preference. The Veloxi preferred standing tables because their segmented legs did not bend the right way for sitting. The Drenari preferred low tables close to the floor because it reminded them of the marshlands of their homeworld. The single human on board preferred whatever table had the most interesting audience, Marcus. Cole had been cleared for supervised movement 3 days after waking up. Supervised meant that a medical officer had to be within visual range at all times and that his vitals were being monitored remotely, and that at least 4 members of the crew had been quietly instructed to watch him for signs of what Dr. Wren called acute psychological episode. Marcus knew all of this. He thought it was hilarious word had spread through the ship the way it always does on small vessels. The human is brain damaged but walking around. The human says things that do not make sense. The human smiles when he should be screaming. Be gentle with him. Do not upset him. He does not know he is broken. Marcus sat down at a table near a group of young Veluxe cadets. They were fresh out of academy. Their chitin was still bright and unscratched, and their antennae moved in quick nervous patterns when they saw him approach. One of them, a female with pale blue plating named Sari, had been assigned to monitor his meals and make sure he ate enough protein to support his healing. "Lieutenant Cole," she said carefully. "How are you feeling today?" "Like 1,000,000 credits, Marcus said. "Whatever that means." "I actually have no idea what the exchange rate is." The cadets looked at each other. Sari made a note on her datapad. A young male cadet named Tivak worked up the courage to speak. He had been staring at Marcus since the human sat down, and his large dark eyes were filled with the kind of fascination usually reserved for dangerous wildlife exhibits. "Lieutenant," he said, "we read your rescue report. How did you survive the vacuum exposure? 40 seconds is beyond any recorded survival threshold for your species." Marcus looked at him. He chewed his food slowly. He swallowed. He put down his utensil and leaned forward slightly. "I just held my breath," he said. "Humans can do that for about 10 minutes if we are annoyed enough." The table went silent. Tavok's antenna went flat against his head, which was the Veluxi equivalent of turning white with shock. Sari dropped her datapad. Another cadet actually stood up and backed away from the table. "I need to report this," Sari whispered, and she was gone before Marcus could say another word. Marcus watched her go and took another bite of his food. It was some kind of protein paste that tasted like cardboard mixed with regret. He had eaten worse. Boot camp on Mars had served something they called meatloaf that was technically classified as a building material by 3 separate regulatory agencies. He was halfway through his meal when the alarm hit. It was not a soft alarm. It was not a drill tone. It was the deep pulsing red alert that meant something hostile had been detected and the ship was in danger. The lights in the mess hall shifted from warm white to a dull crimson. Crew members froze. Cadets looked at each other with wide eyes. A voice came over the intercom. "Attention all hands. 4 Karath Raider corvettes detected on intercept trajectory. Estimated contact in 12 minutes. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. The mess hall emptied fast. Biloxi moved in quick clicking strides toward their posts. Jonari shuffled low and fast toward the lower decks. The cadets scrambled. Food trays were abandoned. Chairs were knocked over. Marcus did not move. He sat at his table and chewed his food and looked at the red light pulsing on the ceiling and felt something wake up inside his chest. It was not fear. It was not panic. It was the same thing he had felt when the Korath had blown his fighter apart. The same thing he had felt floating in the void watching the stars go dark. It was a cold, sharp clarity that settled behind his eyes like a scope locking onto a target. He swallowed his food and stood up and said, "To the empty mess hall guests, lunch is cancelled." Rude then, he walked to the bridge. Captain Yoth was standing at the command console when Marcus arrived. Yoth was old for a Drenari. His skin was dark gray and weathered, and his eyes had the flat calm of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything. But he was surprised now. The tactical display showed 4 red signatures, closing fast, and his ship had 2 light plasma turrets, and a shield system that was designed to stop debris, not weapons fire. "We are medical vessel," Yoth said to his bridge crew. "We are not equipped for this. Begin broadcasting surrender protocols on all frequencies." No. Everyone on the bridge turned. Marcus was standing at the back near the door. He was still wearing his medical gown. His ribs were still wrapped. His left eye was still slightly swollen. He looked like a man who should have been in bed. Captain Marcus said, "Do not surrender," Lieutenant Cole Yoth said slowly. "You should be in the medical bay. You are not cleared for I need your comm system and your tactical display," Marcus said. "And I need your helm officer to do exactly what I tell them. You have 11 minutes before those corvettes are in weapons range, and I have fought Korath raiders 6 times. I know how they hunt. I know how they think. And I know how to make 4 corvettes very, very sorry they picked this ship." Yoth stared at him. The bridge was silent, except for the alarm. "The human is delirious," someone whispered from the sensor station. Marcus heard it. He smiled. That bloody broken smile. "Yeah," he said. "I get that a lot." 11 minutes. Captain Yoth made the fastest decision of his career. He stepped aside. The next 10 minutes were the most confusing and terrifying and impossible 10 minutes in the history of the tender mercy. Marcus took the tactical station, and his hands moved across the controls with a speed and precision that made Vosk, who was watching from the medbay feed, actually sit down in shock. He rerouted power from the secondary life support systems to the shields. He recalibrated the 2 plasma turrets to fire in a synchronized pattern that tripled their effective damage at close range. He identified a flaw in the Korath pack hunting formation. They always sent 2 ships ahead and kept 2 behind. The front pair would test the shields. The rear pair would move in for the killing, lest the target was already dead. "Here is what we are going to do," Marcus said, and his voice was calm and easy and almost cheerful. "I need helm to cut all power in exactly 4 minutes. Everything, engines, shields, lights, life support, everything. We go dark. We play dead. The Korath do not waste ammunition on corpses. They will close in to scan for salvage. When the lead pair is within 300 meters, I need helm to fire everything we have. Full engine burn. Both turrets." Right in their faces, he paused and looked around the bridge at the wide-eyed crew. "I call this one the possum," he said. "And now we add a pinch of hard burn to the left thruster. Not too much. We do not want to overcook it." Nobody understood the words, but everybody understood the tone. It was the tone of a man who had done this before, who had been here before, who stood in the mouth of death and did not flinch. They did it. They followed every instruction. The ship went dark. The crew held their breath in the blackness. The Korath came closer, closer. The hull groaned. as the raider corvettes passed overhead, so near that Marcus could hear the vibration of their engines through the deck. Plates now, he said. The Tender Mercy lit up like a star. Engines roared to life. The turrets fired in perfect sync. The lead corvette took both shots directly through its cockpit viewport and came apart in a silent bloom of fire. The second corvette tried to turn, but Marcus had already adjusted the heading, and the Tender Mercy slammed through the debris field and put a second volley into its engine. Core 2 down. 2 fleeing. The rear pair had not expected their prey to come back from the dead. They broke formation and ran, and the darkness of space swallowed them. The bridge was silent. The red alert was still pulsing, but there was nothing left to be alert about. Crew members stood at their stations and stared at the human in the medical gown who was leaning against the tactical console, breathing hard because his broken ribs were screaming at him. Marcus looked at Captain Yoth. He looked at the crew. He shrugged. What? I told you the food here would kill me before the enemy did. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed, but Thilla, standing in the doorway of the bridge, felt it. She felt every emotional field on that bridge shift at the same time. The fear drained away. The confusion drained away. And what replaced it was something massive and bright and overwhelming. It was the feeling of being alive when you should have been dead, and the human was smiling. The ready room of Captain Yoth was small and plain and smelled like the stale recycled air that every ship in the Galactic Union smelled like after too many weeks between port calls. There was a desk, 2 chairs, a viewport that showed the stars. And right now there were 5 people crowded into a room built for 2, and the tension was thick enough to chew. Captain Yoth sat behind his desk. Thilla stood to his left. Vosk stood to his right. Ren sat in one of the chairs with his datapad on his knee, and his expression locked somewhere between frustration and something that looked almost like embarrassment. Marcus sat in the other chair. He had been given a proper uniform now. It did not fit perfectly, because the ship did not stock human sizes, but someone had modified a Drenari engineering jumpsuit, and it worked well enough. His ribs were still healing. His eye was almost back to normal, and he was looking at the 4 aliens in the room with the calm patience of a man who had been waiting for this conversation for days. Lieutenant Cole, Thilla said, and her voice was careful and measured in the way it always was when she was about to say something she found difficult. I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer honestly. Shoot, Marcus said. Thilla flinched. Voss put his hand near the emergency alarm. Marcus raised both hands. Sorry. It is an expression. It means go ahead. Please continue. Thilla took a slow breath through her spiracles. Her antenna moved in tight circles, which Marcus had learned meant she was processing complex emotions. Lieutenant Cole, are you aware that this crew, that this entire ship, has believed for the past 5 days that you are cognitively impaired? Marcus looked at her. He looked at Vosk. He looked at Dr. Wren. He looked at Captain Yoth. Then he leaned back in his chair, and a grin spread across his face that was so wide and so bright that Thilla felt it hit her empathic senses like a wave of warm light. Oh, I know, he said. It has been the funniest part of my whole week, and I got blown up on Monday. The room went very quiet. You knew, Vosk said, the whole time. Marcus said, you knew. We thought you were Dr. Wren. Started broken in the head. Yeah, I heard your report through the walls, Doc. The one about species-wide cognitive dysfunction. That was my favorite part. I laughed so hard I cracked my rib again. Dr. Wren set his datapad down on his knee. He looked at it. He picked it up again. He set it down again. In 200 years of psychiatric practice, he had never once been the one who felt like he needed evaluation. Then what? Yoth said from behind his desk, and his voice was flat and hard because Yoth was a captain, and captains did not like being surprised. What exactly have you been doing? This whole time I have been joking, Marcus said. The word did not translate, the universal translator that every member of the Galactic Union wore processed the word and returned a string of approximate meanings: fabricating, misleading, performing falsehood for social purpose, deliberate generation of irrational statements. None of the translations were right. All of them were close enough to be dangerous. You have been lying, Dr. Wren said. No, Marcus said, and the grin faded slightly. Not lying. Joking. There is a difference, explained Thilla said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at the viewport. The stars were cold and distant and beautiful, and he had almost died among them less than a week ago. He could still feel it sometimes. The moment when the air left his lungs and the cold came in, and the universe got very big and very dark and very honest. When he spoke again, his voice was different. The warmth was still there, but underneath, it was something made of iron. Humans break, he said. We break all the time. We break our bones. We break our hearts. We break our minds. The universe has been trying to kill us since the first one of us crawled out of the ocean and looked up at the sky. And it has not stopped. Disease, war, famine, vacuum, radiation, cold, heat, gravity. Every single thing in existence is trying to end us, and it has been that way for 300,000 years. He paused, and somewhere along the way we figured something out. If you can laugh at the thing that is trying to kill you, it loses power over you. Not real power. It can still kill you. The vacuum does not care if you are funny. The broken ribs do not heal faster because you told a good joke. But in here, he tapped the side of his head. In here it changes everything. Because fear is a cage. Pain is a cage. Despair is a cage. And laughter is the key. Not because it fixes anything, but because it proves that you are still you. Still thinking. Still choosing. Still refusing to let the worst moment of your life be the thing that defines you. Ready Room was completely silent. Thilla's antenna had gone still, which Marcus had never seen before. Vosk's flat eyes were wide. Theron's hands were motionless on his datapad. Even Yath had leaned forward behind his desk. Every joke I made, Marcus said. Every stupid comment. Every ridiculous claim about holding my breath in vacuum. Every complaint about the food. All of it was me choosing to stay me. I was not broken. I was holding myself together in the only way humans know how. We laugh at death because the alternative is to kneel before it. And we do not kneel. He looked at Thilio, felt it, he said. That first day, when you could not figure out what my emotional signature was. You have a word for fear. You have a word for pain. You have a word for despair. But you did not have a word for what I was feeling. Thilla's voice was barely a whisper. What were you feeling? Defiance, Marcus said. I was dying, and I was laughing, and I was telling the universe that it had not beaten me yet. That is not a malfunction, Thilla. That is the most human thing there is. Thilla felt it then. The full weight of it. Not just from Marcus, but from the idea of it. An entire species. Billions of them. Scattered across the stars. Every single one of them carrying this same impossible fire inside. The ability to stand in the wreckage of everything they loved and find something to laugh about. Not because they did not care, but because they cared so much that breaking was not an option. She understood now why her empathic senses had not been able to classify it. It was not one emotion. It was all of them at once. Fear and courage and pain and joy and grief and hope and stubbornness. And love, all compressed into a single bright point of light that burned even in the darkest void. It was human. She turned to her console and opened Marcus Cole's medical file. She deleted the psychological quarantine flag. She deleted the cognitive deterioration diagnosis. She deleted Dr. Wren's 3-page report about species-wide dysfunction. And in the notes section at the bottom, she typed 7 words that would eventually be quoted in medical textbooks. Across 40 star systems, human humor is not a malfunction. It is a weapon. She saved the file and turned back to Marcus, who was watching her with that warm, steady look in his eyes. So Marcus said, "Now that we have established that I'm not crazy, can we talk about the food situation, because I was not joking about that." It is genuinely Terablaeth made a sound. It was short and sharp and came from somewhere deep in his chest, and his flat gray eyes went wide with surprise because he had never made that sound before. It took a moment for everyone in the room to realize what had happened. The Dronari captain had laughed. Marcus grinned, and something shifted in the room. Something that could never shift back. A wall had come down between species. A bridge had been built out of nothing but words and warmth and the terrifying, beautiful, stubborn refusal to stop smiling. And it had started with a man who should have been dead cracking jokes in his hospital bed, because that is what humans do, they laugh. And the galaxy had no idea how to handle it. 6 months changed everything. Marcus Cole was no longer a patient on the Tender Mercy. He was permanent crew, tactical liaison, strategic consultant, the only human on a medical frigate with no weapons worth bragging about, and a crew that had once diagnosed him with being too happy to be sane. Captain Yoth had filed the transfer request personally, and when Union Command asked why a medical vessel needed a combat pilot, Yoth had written 3 words in the justification box: "You will understand." They did not understand. Not yet. But they would. The story had spread. Not through official channels. Not through military reports. It spread the way the best stories always spread. Whispered in mess halls. Shared over comlinks between ships. Passed from crew to crew at space stations and refueling depots. The story of the human who got pulled out of a destroyed fighter half dead and started making jokes. The human who the doctors thought was brain damaged because he would not stop laughing. The human who saved a medical ship from 4 corvettes while wearing a hospital gown and narrating the battle like he was teaching a cooking class. The story grew. The way stories do. And it reached places Marcus never expected. Dr. Wren published his paper 2 months after the incident. He had rewritten it completely. The original title had been something about cognitive dysfunction. The new title was Laughter as a Survival Mechanism and the Human Paradox of Irrational Morale. It was 40 pages long, and it was the most honest thing Wren had ever written, because half of it was an admission that he had been wrong. That his entire framework for understanding psychological resilience had been missing a variable that only one species in the known galaxy possessed. The paper went viral. In academic terms, this meant it was downloaded 9 million times in its first week and discussed in every xenopsychology department on every Union world. In practical terms, it meant that aliens across the galaxy started paying attention to the strange noises humans made when things went wrong. The Veluxi were the most affected. Their empathic nature meant they could feel human humor, even if they could not understand it. Thiller reported that being near Marcus during one of his jokes was like standing near a small sun, warm, bright, impossible to ignore. She had started studying human comedy. She watched recordings of something called stand-up, which confused her enormously. She watched human soldiers laughing in war zones and human doctors, laughing in emergency rooms and human parents, laughing while covered in the bodily fluids of their offspring. She did not understand all of it, but she understood the core of it. The defiance, the refusal, the bright, stubborn fire. She shared her research with the Veluxi cadets. Sari, the young cadet who had once fled the mess hall in terror after Marcus claimed he could hold his breath for 10 minutes, was now his most dedicated student. She was trying to learn to tell jokes. Her first attempt was why did the plasma conduit cross the engineering bay. Marcus had waited with genuine anticipation because it was magnetically attracted to the opposite terminal. It was not funny. Not even a little. But Marcus had laughed anyway because the effort was beautiful and the laughter was real, and that was the whole point. Other crew members followed. Vosk attempted humor exactly once. He told Marcus that his healing rate was statistically improbable, and then added, "Unless you are lying about being a single organism." Marcus told him that was actually hilarious, and Vosk spent 3 days trying to figure out if that was itself a joke. The Tender Mercy changed. It was still a medical ship, still unarmed except for the 2 light turrets, still crewed by doctors and nurses and scientists who had never signed up for combat. But there was something different in the air now. Something that had not been there before. Marcus Cole had bled all over their medbay and smiled about it. Hope. Not the quiet, desperate hope of people who had no other choice. The loud, stubborn, unreasonable hope of people who had decided that the universe was funny, and they were going to laugh at it whether it liked it or not. Then came the day that everything was tested. The distress call came in at 0300 ship time. A Union battlecruiser, the Onhold, had been ambushed by a Korath war fleet in the Venya corridor. The ship was disabled, engines dead, shields failing, and Korath shock troops had breached the hull and were moving deck by deck, killing everyone they found. The nearest military response was 4 hours away. The Tender Mercy was 40 minutes out. Youth did not hesitate. He set an intercept course. And then he looked at Marcus, and Marcus looked back, and something passed between them that did not need words. Marcus stood in the cargo bay 20 minutes later and looked at the people who had volunteered to follow him onto a battlecruiser full of Korath soldiers. There were 15 of them. 3 Veluxi cadets, including Sari, 4 Dranari nurses, 2 engineers, a cook, and Phila, who had told Marcus that if he thought she was staying behind, he had finally actually lost his mind. None of them were soldiers. None of them had combat training. They had medical kits and engineering tools, and 1 plasma cutter that Vosk had modified to work as a weapon sword. Marcus looked at them. He saw the fear. He saw the trembling hands and the wide eyes and the quick breathing. He saw people who had every reason to stay on the ship and no reason to walk into a battle, except that someone needed help and they could not stand by and do nothing. He loved them for it. Every single one of them. "All right," he said. "Listen up. We are a bunch of doctors, nurses, and 1 guy who fixes the coffee machine. That is me," said the cook, whose name was Drelly Nodro. "You make terrible coffee, but today you are going to be terrifying. Here is the truth. The Korath do not know who we are. They do not know what we are. They think they are fighting a broken ship full of dying soldiers. They are not ready for us. And they are definitely not ready for what we are about to do." He paused and looked at each of them one by one. "We go in loud. We go in mean. And if anyone gets scared, just laugh. I am serious. Laugh, scream, yell, make noise. Make them wonder what kind of insane species charges into a gunfight with medical equipment and smiles about it. Because I will tell you a secret about fear. It goes both ways. And nothing in this galaxy is more terrifying than a species that runs toward danger with a grin on its face." They breached the airlock at full speed. Marcus went first. He always went first. The first Korath they encountered was a shock trooper standing guard at a corridor junction. It was 8 feet tall and covered in black armored plates, and it had a plasma rifle the size of Marcus' entire torso. Marcus hit it with the plasma cutter. Phila hit it with a surgical laser that had been overcharged to 3 times its rated output. Sari hit it with a fire extinguisher because she had not been given a weapon, and it was the heaviest thing she could find. The Korath went down. They kept moving, corridor by corridor. deck by deck. They were not graceful. They were not tactical. They were messy and loud and terrified and alive. Marcus cracked jokes the entire time. He called out Korath positions like he was giving directions to a restaurant. He narrated firefights like sports commentary. When a plasma bolt missed his head by inches, he turned to Sari and said, "I think they like me." Sari was shaking so hard she could barely hold the fire extinguisher. But she laughed. A short, sharp clicking sound that rattled her antenna. And the fear in her chest loosened just a little. Just enough. They reached the survivors on the iron hold 40 minutes later. 200 crew members barricaded in the engine room. The Korath were falling back. Not because they were outgunned. They were not. But because they had encountered something they had no protocol for. A boarding party of medical staff charging through corridors, laughing and screaming and refusing to die. Marcus took a plasma burn to the shoulder in the final push. It hurt. It hurt more than the vacuum, more than the broken ribs. The pain was white and blinding, and for 1 second, his vision went dark, and he felt the old familiar cold of almost dying reach up and grab him, and he laughed. He laughed because it was not going to win. Not today. Not ever. He had been broken before, and he would be broken again, and every single time he would put himself back together. With spit and stubbornness and the absolute refusal to let the last sound he made be a scream. Thilla found him afterwards. He was sitting against a bulkhead with his shoulder wrapped in an emergency bandage and his face pale from blood loss and his eyes half closed. She was furious. She was terrified. She was so full of emotions that her empathic senses were overloading. And she could not separate her own feelings from his. Absolute reckless. Impossible. She did not have a word for what she wanted to call him. Marcus looked up at her. His eyes were glassy with pain, but the warmth was still there. That impossible warmth. "Hey, Thilla," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. What? Do you call a Korath with no legs?" She did not want to answer. Every part of her rational mind told her not to answer. He was bleeding. He was hurt. This was not the time. What she said does not matter. They cannot run from us either way. Thilla laughed. It was a sound no Veloxi had ever made. A sharp, bright clicking that came from deep in her chest and resonated through her entire exoskeleton. Her antenna vibrated. Her chitin plates rattled. It was ugly and awkward and nothing like human laughter, and it was the most beautiful sound Marcus had ever heard. She stared at him. He stared at her. Neither of them fully understood what had just happened, but they both felt it. A door opening. A wall falling. Something ancient and alien and deeply alive passing between species that had never been able to share this one thing until right now. "You taught me something," Marcus Cole Thilla said. Quietly, "What is that?" "How to refuse." Marcus smiled, closed his eyes. Let the medical team take over. He had done enough. The Union intelligence database was updated 3 weeks later. It was a routine update. New species data. New cultural notes. New warnings for diplomatic personnel and military commanders across all sectors. Most of the updates were minor. One of them was not under the entry for Homo sapiens. Between the notes about their unusual healing rate and their dangerous curiosity, a new addendum had been added. It was flagged as priority reading for all Union personnel. It was translated into every known language. And it read WRNING cultural note: if a human is injured, outnumbered, or facing certain death and begins to laugh, do not assume cognitive failure. Do not assume psychological collapse. Do not assume the human has accepted defeat. Assume the opposite. Assume the situation is about to change violently and in their favor. Human laughter in the face of death is not a malfunction. It is not a symptom. It is not weakness. It is the sound of a species that has been fighting the universe for 300,000 years and has never once considered losing under no circumstances should hostile parties interpret human humor as an opportunity. It is a warning. It is the last warning you will get, and at the very bottom in small text that have been added by an anonymous contributor, whose emotional signature the system logged as warm and bright and defiant, was a single line: they laugh because they refuse to kneel. And that is why the galaxy will never break them.